when we submit these things, when we walk through these trials and temptations, when we say, Lord, whatever you want to do with my life, whatever you want to do with my finances, whatever you want to do with these relationships, whatever you want to do in these situations, I want to follow you.
Hello, and welcome to the Hill City Podcast. My name is John, and this is Hannah. And today, wherever you are, we are going over and discussing what Hannah spoke to us the last service. And I just want to begin by Hannah giving us a summary, and then we'll jump right in.
So last time we continued our series Life with Jesus, which is walking through the book of Mark. And we said we've sort of hit the halfway point. Mark 8, which John talked about last time, is that turning point of the whole book. And so I talked about Mark 10, verses 32 through 52. And in the book of Mark, everything is very fast paced up to the turning point. And then we sort of get this slow-mo walk with Jesus towards Jerusalem and towards the cross, because one of the main, if not the main theme of Mark, is Jesus as the suffering Messiah. Yeah. And those two terms would not have made sense to the people of his day. When they imagined a Messiah, it was someone powerful, someone who would kick out the Romans, someone who would fulfill a lot of prophecy, but not someone they thought of being sent as an envoy from the all-powerful God to suffer and die. And so Jesus talks a lot in Mark about how the Son of Man must be condemned and suffer and die. So in these verses, it's 20 verses from Mark 10, verses 32 through 52. Jesus has two encounters. He has one with two of his disciples, James and John, who are asking him for a seat at his right and left hand. So positions of power is what they're asking for. And then also the encounter with a blind man named Bartimaeus as he's leaving Jericho. Again, all of this is on the road to Jerusalem. And so these encounters don't seem like they have much in common, but one of the important things about reading connected chapters in the Bible is seeing how the author has intentionally woven together themes or phrases. And there's a repeated question in both of these encounters. And it's, what do you want me to do for you? Jesus says this to James and John, and he also says it to Bartimaeus. So we talked about how our view of Jesus changes what we will ask of him. How we view Jesus changes what we will ask of him. James and John asked for power because their conception of the Messiah was one of glory and honor. Like Jesus told them, they didn't know what they were asking for. And then Bartimaeus, he asked for a real physical need, but he asks to see. And the account ends with him getting up and following Jesus. So you have this vision of what discipleship really means. We talked about how discipleship contains two questions. The question of if you're going to follow Jesus, a decision James and John had made, but also will you follow Jesus when it is against your expectations and when it goes into trials and temptations and suffering, because that's something we're all going to encounter on the journey of discipleship. So we talked about how any other story that speaks of Jesus as king but doesn't include a cross is idolatry, which is a really important thing to wrestle with. And then we just ended with two questions, considering what your answer to Jesus would be. If he was here looking at you and he said, what do you want me to do for you? What would your answer be? What are the preconceptions behind what your answer would be? And then also, if Jesus were to ask you to follow him as he does all his disciples, where is he asking you to follow him? What area of life? What decisions? What things have come up in your life right now that he's asking you to follow him, even if it's into suffering? So that was the sermon summary. You guys can definitely go back and listen to it. I would definitely encourage you to read those accounts from Mark 10. But we just wanted to zero in on a few themes. So what was something that stood out to you in this passage or in the sermon?
Well, as you were just speaking, I was just thinking about just that something that you pointed out, like the way we see Jesus determines what we ask of him. And I was just processing, what is the way you see Jesus, and what have you been asking of him? And I wonder how that really begins to shift, because if Jesus is like that all-knowing genie, like, are we asking genie attempts at him? Do we see him as king, or do we see him as a road out of our bad decisions, our bad situations? And I want to say, like, I don't want to say that's not the case for all of us, because he is Savior.
He is, yeah.
And we do ask him, like, I got myself into this deep mess of sin and I need you to free me. But maybe Jesus's way of freeing us doesn't look like the way we want it. We want this insta life that's like so much better. And he's like, I want you to follow me. And I think that's really the hard part, because following, like you were saying, like the first call is following, and you hear it from us, like, it's not just believe me. He says, follow me. I wish it was believe me. And in all my life, I was told, believe me. Like, if you believe the right things will happen to you. And then as I was growing up, and I'm not saying of age, but as I was following Jesus, that wasn't it. Believing is just a part of following. If we believe Jesus, are we actually going to follow him? And maybe that's the question for all of us to ask. Are we, in this moment of life, in the goods and in the bads, will we continue to choose to follow him, even if that means into suffering, even if that means following him into the unknown, into the dark? Yeah. How about yourself? What was kind of the things that, like...
Well, we talked about how James and John represent so much of what's common in culture, like looking to Jesus for power and honor and glory. And that can crop up. I gave the example back from 2022 when Lauren Boebert had mentioned at a rally or something, like, Jesus he didn't have enough AR-15s to keep his government from killing him, or something ridiculous along those lines. And that seems like a very exaggerated example of this. Like, you've so misunderstood what Jesus was about that you think, like, the point wasn't dying. But it does represent something common in our culture that we think that crops up in the prosperity gospel. It props up in ideas of what Jesus can do for us. Even ideas of, like, he can make, like you said, it's not that he can't make relationships better or your situation better or get you out of this sinful pattern. It's not that he can't do that, but is that the only reason you're following him? Or is it because you love Jesus?
He's king.
Because he's king of your life.
Yeah.
Because you're willing to submit every part of your life to him, even if those things don't get fully resolved by the day you die. That's a really hard thing to think about. Our culture is we make this decision and call ourselves Christians. Therefore, we can expect a certain amount of economic success, relational success, fill in the blank, political success. And that's just not the case.
And it's interesting because we want to use the word blessing, right? And like, we want blessing to mean like what James and John meant. And maybe it does mean that partially at times.
Gracious,
God is gracious. God is good. But what if blessing means that we are walking like Adam and Eve with God in the garden, that we actually get to live a life in communion with God, not just believing God, but like with God. We it's like you're in backstage and you get to see what God is doing. And what would that be worth, really, and how is God calling you into like what he's doing and who he is instead of what we're doing and who I want to be? Yeah. So it's
what
like
we want out of it.
Yeah, it's a completely different view of identity. It's a completely different view of identity.
And I think we see that crop up in even small ways, like in spiritual formation journeys. Like, I really want you to fix this, but maybe he's working on something completely different in your life that you're not willing to submit to him. You know, we talk a lot about hurry. You're like, I really want you to work on this, that I become better at prayer and this and this. It's like, well, you're not willing to make the time for that. So how could I do that? So it could be very practical ways too.
Yeah. And like the second part was like, and I'm sorry, I'm sticking with the James and John thing, but it was, we were talking before, but we could be so close to Jesus things. Like James and John were with Jesus, yet they still missed what he was doing. They still missed his intention, his goal, his vision to the cross. I don't know if because they wanted to like metaphorically, like that's, that's my cross to bear. Sometimes I have bad days, I don't know what it is. Like today was, I don't know how we want to set that up, but that for all of us, there is a cross in our story. And we're called to the cross. Yeah. Like we talked about a little bit last time, but like following Jesus, I say this in weddings, this is horrible, but it is to the death. Like we come together and we say, this is to the death. Like you are going to know the deep parts of me, and some of it you are not going to like, but we are choosing to commit to one another, right? Yeah. To the death. Like a part of me will die so that both of us can be resurrected. Don't go that direction, John. But in that way, I wonder how we see our life to the cross.
Yeah. And I think it's easy to, obviously you could get in a very pessimistic view of the Christian walk too. Like you could go to that extreme and feel like there will be if that's true, then there'll be no joy or anything else. But the promise is when we walk through that with Jesus, there is a resurrection. Yeah. And I just mentioned in the sermon, Hebrews 12, which I love, Jesus as the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, that he's gone on before us, that he's already suffered unto death so that we can follow him and know there's going to be resurrection on the other side. When we submit these things, when we walk through these trials and temptations, when we say, Lord, whatever you want to do with my life, whatever you want to do with my finances, whatever you want to do with these relationships, whatever you want to do in these situations, I want to follow you. There is that joy of Bartimaeus who gets to see who Jesus really is and then follow him.
Yeah, I love that. Like, what if Jesus is the absolute best thing for you and we just don't know it yet because we're still holding on to the life that we have, trying not to lose what we have in our hand. Yeah. And Jesus is asking us to follow him and that you would see like heaven open up, right? He even said that. And I wonder if we're just holding on I'm not trying to C.S. Lewis us, but like we're building mud patties when God has given us like vacations or holiday at the sea. Yeah. So yeah, maybe this is a time for us to really think as Jesus would ask us today, what do you want me to do? And what does it look like to follow me? And maybe that he might take us into the deep waters. But I would say that Jesus, I know he loves you. I know that he is good. And he holds what is the best thing for us. Any last thoughts?
Well, I kind of was just thinking of that John Mark Comer quote I had included in here. It's from his newer book, Practicing the Way. But he just writes, it's the very things we run from, avoid at all costs, dread, medicate, and deny that hold the secret to our liberation. These unhappy times of great emotional pain, in a beautifully redemptive turn, have the potential, if we open to God in them, to transform us into grounded, deeply joyful people. And of course, the caveat there, if we open to God in them, is so important, that we have a stake in this, that as we're going through these difficulties, there's a choice to be made as his disciples. And I know that some people go through such difficult things that might seem very easy to say and not to do. I understand that, but there is something in just surrendering. God, what do you want to do with this? Like, this is a broken, messy, horrible situation. I know you're weeping with me over this, but what do you want to do in me through this situation?
Yeah. It reminds me of Genesis 50:20. It says, like, though you want to harm me, like, God used this for good, for the saving of many lives.
Yeah.
We'll end with that. Thank you for joining us, and hope that you guys are getting together in groups and discussing and following Jesus. God bless you.